Ladies and gentlemen, welcome at today's press conference at the... I'll speak for a tiny bit more than I usually do, having those two distinguished guests next to me. At this year's festival, the Crystal Globe for Outstanding Artistic Contribution to World Cinema will be presented to two individuals who together have influenced the history of British cinema. Next to me is director Ken Loach. Welcome.
Thank you.
And his longtime collaborator, colleague, and screenwriter, who is also a lawyer originally, Paul Laverty. They have worked together on 12 feature films and 2 shorts in the process of becoming pioneers of British social realist film with a humanitarian message. You all know that the films of Ken Loach and Paul Laverty are regular winners of the international and European film festivals. First of all, Cannes, but also Venice. And Mr. Loach is also no stranger to Karlovy Vary Film Festival and has close ties to it. They're receiving several prizes at different times, including the 1968 award for the Best Female Actress for Color White and the movie Poor Cow, or his groundbreaking film Cass in 1970. The younger audience might remember maybe The Angel's Share, which has been shown with a great audience success in 2012. This important visit is also marking 3 decades since the launch of the European Film Academy, with the screening of several films that were awarded by the EFA and also won other major prizes at some of the world's most important festivals. Those 2 distinguished gentlemen are here to present 2 of their movies, Land and Freedom from 1995, which is a movie from Spanish Civil War, and it was interesting about it that Mr. Laverty is one of the main actors here.
That's false news there. False news from Donald Trump, I think.
And I'm gonna sum up now, and I'll obviously give the floor to your questions. But another movie which you are about to see to be presented at the Grand Hall today at 2 p.m. is actually The Sweet 16 from 2002, which I'm sure some of your questions will be related to. So it's my pleasure to give you the floor now. Can we start? Are you okay? Can we start? Okay. Okay.
Are we going to translate or not?
There is a set for you.
Hello, Mr. Loach. This is Gustavo Monge from the Spanish news agency EFE. I understand that in the 1970s and 80s you had to step aside because Mrs. Thatcher was in office and you were sort of in exile. And you came back very, very successfully in the 90s. What is your stance now in the context of Brexit? Is this conducive for your work? And furthermore, is this Brexit going to mean some damaging effect for the less privileged people? How do you see it?
There's a lot of big questions in that. What happened when Margaret Thatcher and the government came to power was that there was a huge attack on the working class of Britain. Their trade unions were weakened, their wages were cut, there was mass unemployment, there were laws against trade unions, and the media, particularly television and broadcasting, adopted a right-wing perspective to suit her. So for some of us that was quite difficult. And I wasn't in exile, but a number of us found it difficult to find the kind of work that we'd done before. And I made some documentaries which were effectively banned from television. They were made by television companies, but they were not shown. and they were about the role of trade unions. The point being that the members of the trade unions were very prepared to fight the Thatcher government, but the leaders of those unions said, don't. They were disorganized, they were separated, they were weakened, and the leaders accommodated to the Thatcher counter-revolution. So that was that period. I think the period now with Britain leaving the European Union, I think was much more complicated for us than it appeared in the press, because many people on the left were torn, because on the one hand, you want to be good internationalists, you want to work with people across Europe, of course. We share everything. But the European Union, as a political project, is not about that. It's about making sure big corporations make big profits and driving states to privatization and putting profit before workers' rights. So it was difficult. On balance, most of us wanted to stay because we felt the problems were outweighed by the advantages. But it was difficult. You know, people were pulled in different directions. The danger is that if the right wing stays in power, that taxes will be very low for corporations, labor will be cheap, and investment will be encouraged because of that, because there's cheap labor and the corporations won't pay much tax. And that's the right-wing strategy. So obviously we have to fight that. But the other, sorry, this is such a long answer, but it was a big question. The other thing to add is that it is a critical moment now for us. We have a resurgence of the left, which no one foresaw, no one could see it coming. But the Labour Party, the Social Democratic Party, is being led by a socialist. And the question is he a social democrat or is he further to the left? And some of us are doing all we can to make certain he's further to the left. Whether we succeed or not, I don't know. But if he and his group and his party now were to take power, were to be in government, they could seriously change the politics of Britain, returning to ideas of common ownership, but different model of common ownership with democratic control and a planned economy instead of the fight between big corporations. And that is, we are just on the cusp of that now. We are just on the cusp. So it's a very special time, and we don't know how it'll go. Paul hasn't written the end of the script yet, so we don't know.
Yeah. But can I just add one tiny, very short thing to the end of that too? But what I think has been remarkable, because we're often asked in our stories, where does hope come from? And oftentimes it's very unexpected. And I think the change over the last 2 months has been absolutely stunning. But that doesn't just happen by accident. I think Jeremy Corbyn, John MacDonald, and the people around him, a very tight circle, have shown enormous political courage because they were faced by a super aggression. It was very interesting to see it. We saw this very closely because we helped with some little election broadcasts. But they were not only confronting the might of the press, business, the Tory party, but also their own right wing within the Labour Party who resigned en masse and tried to get rid of them. And I think they showed tremendous courage and political courage to confront that. And I think now they have tapped into a great wave of optimism and also discontent at the way things are, because reality and the brutality of reality is imposing itself in so many people's lives. So you really have to be open to surprises, not only in screenplays, but also in politics and life, I think.
Thank you. Another question, Jana Podskaska? Thank you.
Podskalská deník, dobrý den. V programu, Dobrý den, Podskalská. V programu běží 2 vaše filmy, které tady byly zmíněny, Sladkých 16 let a Země svoboda. Tak by mě zajímalo, nakolik si vy sám těchto 2 titulů v rámci své celé tvorby ceníte a jestli byste k nim případně zařadili ještě nějaká jiná díla, která jsou vaše srdeční záležitostí nebo jsou z nějakého jiného důvodu pro vás důležitá. Děkuji.
Well, they're different films, of course, and we've sometimes tried to make films about the big critical moments in our history when things could have gone one way and could have gone the other way, and the Spanish Civil War was such a moment. It was the first big war against fascism, and it was a time when the working class people from across Europe joined together to support the Republic. And I suppose we wanted to make the film to really, because no one would defend fascism now. At least we used to think no one would defend fascism now. I mean, you look across Europe now and you worry because there are fascist elements abroad, around, and so we know that the beast is not dead. But at the time we made the film, the central issue that seemed to us to come from Spain and the Spanish Civil War was that the split in the left between those who supported the idea of a new a system that supported everybody, that cherished everybody, was destroyed by what we in the West call the Stalinist regime in Russia. And I know in different Eastern European countries the terminology is different, but that's the one we use. And that it was an anti-Stalinist film. And ironically, when it was shown here, shortly after it was made, because people sing the Internationale, it was identified as a pro-Stalinist film, despite the fact that the whole point of the story was to show the betrayal by the Communist Party of those who really wanted change. So we were caught in an irony of history there. So I'd be very interested to see how people respond now. But Paul should talk about 316.
And also, I'm delighted Land and Freedom is being shown, and I emphasise this was written by the wonderful Jim Allen. And I'm very, very pleased about this, that this film has been showed when both Ken and myself are here, because I was talking to Ken coming along here, and he was here first in 1970 with Kess. So I realise I've come very late in the day, and he's been making films for many, many years beforehand, with many, many other writers with whom he had a very special relationship. So I had met Jim a few times. He was a marvellous man, brilliant writer, and so I'm really, really glad to see him honoured as part of this festival, which celebrates collaboration. So I'm very, very pleased about that. In relation to 16 films, well, I'm delighted this was chosen. We had, it was wonderful writing a screenplay for young people. It was wonderful working with Ken on the casting, just outside Glasgow in Greenock, and I think it captures some of the wildness of youth, their grand plans, their crazy ideas. So I've got great, great memories of it, working with brilliant young actors, and there was a great sense of vitality despite the constant rain over the River Clyde. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a question at the back, please.
Spáčilová dnes. Mě by zajímalo, bych se vrátila od politiky k k vašemu vztahu, jak jste se vlastně potkali, proč jste si padli do noty, v čem jste si porozuměli, jak jste spolu tak dlouho vydrželi spolupracovat a hlavně, jestli jste se navzájem jeden od druhého něčemu naučili. Děkuji.
Thank you. For another hour now.
Oh, well, I got a letter from Paul in 1991 or 1992, I think, when Paul had been in Nicaragua as a lawyer, a human rights lawyer, observing what was happening in the war, the Contra war by the Americans, promoted by the Americans, North Americans, against the Sandinista government in Nicaragua, because the Sandinista government was a revolutionary government. It was changing the politics of Nicaragua in favor of the people. The United States didn't like this and sent in terrorists. There was a war, and a number of brave people, including my comrade here, went to Nicaragua to record what they saw. So Paul wrote about this in a letter, and we met and talked, and then one thing led to another, and we made a film that Paul wrote about his time in Nicaragua. And then we did one in Glasgow, which is Paul's home city. We found we both liked keeping up to date with the football scores. So we exchanged messages about that and whatever else. And one thing's led to another, really. I've been very lucky.
Can I just also say a very special thanks to the festival and to Carol and his team, because we've been to many, many festivals together, but I haven't seen a writer and director honoured like this before. And it transcends the actual working relationship Ken and myself have, because I think it is terrific that a festival has recognised collaboration. Now, I've been one of the luckiest writers in the world, having spent so much time working with Ken, also with Thea Boyeen from Spain, and I had a lovely experience with Clive Gordon too. I did one film with him. And I realise from talking to other writers how lucky I have been, and I say that with no false modesty at all. I've been incredibly lucky. But I think it's really important that a festival like this has honoured collaboration between writer and director. And this is one thing, going back to your question, which I have learned from Ken, and it's something I think is very, very important, and it's the simplest question of all, and it's why this story? Why this story? We've got many, many choices around us, and to look at that very, very carefully, because the great privilege of making a film is not only working with many, many other talented people, beyond the writing and directing part of it, the actors, the incredible finance that has to be raised, the amazing work that producers do, perhaps to find stories which are less popular, like Rebecca O'Brien did when we did a trade union story in the States called Bread and Roses. So the idea that we're going to have this marvellous privilege that people will see up on screen, people will distribute it around the world. So I think that, going back to that question of why this story is really, really so important, that's one of the most important things I've learned from working with Ken. And a second thing, which is equally important, I think, is to learn to listen. And I think sometimes if you listen, you learn an awful lot more than just by speaking all the time.
Thank you. There's, yeah, okay, at the back, sorry. Yeah.
Ještě jednou deník, dobrý den. Já se zastavím u vašeho posledního společného filmu Já, Daniel Blake, který loni vyhrál v Cannes, který jsme měli možnost vidět také u nás. A zajímalo mě, protože v jedné z těch rovin se vlastně zabýváte tím, jak složitě se ta nejstarší generace vyrovnává s internetem a sociálními sítěmi, tak se chci zeptat, čistě pro odlehčení, vy patříte vlastně také k této generaci. Jaký je váš vztah k tomuhle fenoménu internetu a sociálních sítí? Děkuji.
Well, it's practically non-existent, really. I can't work it, I'm afraid. If I have to claim anything through the internet, I can't do it. I think there comes a point when your brain refuses to receive new information. Well, technical information, that is, not other information, but technical information. But it is a serious issue for people who don't have the facility to use the new technology and yet desperately need it to survive. And it is used, certainly by our government, and I suspect other governments across Europe. It is used as an obstacle. It's used as a discipline, so that people are forced to try to do something that they cannot do. They just cannot do it. So they go hungry. So they are in real financial difficulties. And there's a conscious brutality in the way the new technology is enforced, in the knowledge that many people cannot cope. And it's certainly true in our country. Absolutely true. And I suspect it is elsewhere. And I think that's something that's a responsibility that you have as well as we have, to expose that and demand that should not happen.
I think with any technology, it has great possibilities. And in the film Daniel Blake, we saw it being used to very cruel purpose, as Ken mentioned and as you suggested in your question. But it's not neutral, but it can be used for wonderful. It has many wonderful possibilities, and we've seen that recently in the election in the United Kingdom, for example. The right-wing press, for example, were always convinced that they'd be able to deliver a Tory victory. The Sun, owned by Murdoch, the Daily Mail, another vicious right-wing paper, felt as if they were kings in relation to propaganda and news. And I think what we saw in this last election too was social media used to circumvent that and to present a different narrative, and it was used to great purpose. So it's great that people take control of the medium and use it for best purpose. And I think another very interesting thing too is when we look at massive companies like Google, for example. I mean, everybody uses Google now, but we don't seem to be asking very, very basic questions about it. Google harvests incredible information from us. It uses that for advertising. It makes fortunes. But in harvesting that information, it uses everything for private gain. And many, many people are beginning to ask, well, if you're using all this social information, why can't a significant percentage of that be used for the common good? So I think we have to understand it and master it and use it for the common purpose rather than just selfish ends. So I think there's great challenges and great possibilities with it.
Just to add to what Paul said, I think that what I didn't say, and Paul very properly did, is that the move to the left was largely due to young people using the new technology. So while I was being very pessimistic about it, it had this huge enlivening, and suddenly there was communication happening that was quite separate. There was a public discourse that existed separate to the newspapers and to the broadcasters, and that hadn't happened before. So we shouldn't underestimate that. I mean, it suddenly transformed our public conversation. So in that sense, it was absolutely liberating.
Thank you. Marking the 30 years of the European Film Academy, we all know how the European movies are important and what a great inspiration you are for the current European movie movement. But what was your inspiration, Mr. Loach, when you started filmmaking all those years ago in terms of maybe concrete filmmakers?
Well, I mean, there are a number of things that you draw on. I think all young people draw on that feed their imagination, and some are books, some are, for me it was theatre, for comedy, for what we call stand-up comedy, you know, which is very much a working class culture of just jokes and observation of real life, and there's still photographs of the time. But in film terms, the films that inspired me were European films, absolutely, from all across Europe, from Italy, for the post-war period, De Sica and other directors like that, and from Polish films, and certainly from the Czech films. And I've said before on a number of occasions, the Czech films of the 1960s, if I had to pick one group of films, those are the films I would take to a desert island, because they make you smile, they make you sad, they make you understand people, and they make you enjoy people's company. And there's a simplicity and the use of the medium, which is absolutely simple, but absolutely true. And I think if there's one lesson that I think we've learned from those films and other writers, but from those films in particular, is that it's important to be true, and the more simple way you can tell the truth, the better it will communicate, and the more accurate it will be, and the more human it will be. So that truth and simplicity and great warmth is what I think we took from the films of that time, and I'll be forever grateful for that.
Thank you. Yep.
Marcel Arbeid, Moravian. My question is about the relationship of the social and the moral, because I think your movies are liked, even those who are not on the left, who are not socialist, because of the general human appeal and because of the moral problems you present. So I would like to hear from both what the relationship between the social and the moral is for you.
Well, thank you for your question, and I think it's a very, very important one. And certainly when Ken and myself are talking about possible stories, it's almost implicit, not explicit, but it's that interrelationship between the very, very specific of a family or a character and the world around them. And that's what gives it richness, that's what gives it relevance. And any of our films, even the ones that are probably even more light-hearted in comedies like Looking for Eric or Angel's Share, they're all rooted in people's lives. And that's not like some sort of device or some rhetorical device. It's what gives drama to the story. It's understanding that person in the specificity of his life that creates the boundaries of how you plant the story. If they're wealthy and rich and can escape and can walk off and they've got a big bank account, well, you've got no real story with some of the characters we have had. But when people have no escape and they have to make difficult choices, that's the stuff of drama. So to exclude what is around them, their neighbours, their community, their language, their class, their gender, their age, would be absolutely silly. And oftentimes when I watch sometimes very, very skillful films, I feel there's a great emptiness to them despite the great acting or sometimes the sparkling dialogue, because you have no sense of the power and the world of the story. And so it's in that the social and the moral and the humane and the choices and the drama all unfold, I think.
I was interested in the first, how you phrased the question. Could you make that point again? In how you saw the conflict between social and moral and... Because I think there was a really interesting point in there, and I didn't quite get it.
I was just thinking why your film so popular, even among the people who do not share your political viewpoint. And then I came to the conclusion that it's because of the morality in them, that those social moralities are very universal. And that you found a recipe for that. So now I'm self-explaining. This is not a question anymore.
Because also there are excellent films, no?
Well,
That's why we all like them, no matter what the political views
but
are.
you see, I think what is interesting in what you say is that it reflects our different histories. Because for us, you've had an experience of something in inverted commas called socialism that is an appalling, atrocious experience. It's something that we don't recognize as socialism. And I think your question reflects that different experience. But I think the central point is, as Paul said, for us, it's the connection between the private and the public or the social. It's the world that is created, that is a political creation. The relationship between who owns what, why is something made, the terms in which somebody sells their labor, the excess which is taken by someone else in profit and leaves the other poor. It's the social context which determines everything, determines the character's choices, as Paul said, and that the morality is wrapped around that. You know, are we equal or not? Are we privileged or are we desperately poor? Should people be left to rot with nothing, or should some have big yachts and Caribbean islands? And the morality is tied in that. And if someone then takes what is a wonderful idea of equality and turned it into a bureaucratic, deformed nightmare, then that again, there's a morality in that. And that when we were talking about the Spanish Civil War, that's what we tried to show, that monstrous, deformed, bureaucratic nightmare of what is essentially a wonderful idea. So in a way, that the morality is very much tied in with that. But I think what you say is very interesting, because it really reflects the past that we call on.
And I think unraveling all of that is very, very complex, because I think if we just set out to have some, cheap rhetorical manifesto, people would see through it. They would realise that there's not much substance to it, and it's often the complexity and the contradictions that make it universal, because that's what people see in their lives, and that's what we've tried to capture in our stories.
Oh God, can I say something else? Because I think there's something. I'm talking too much, but there's something really interesting here, and I think it relates to cinema and writers and directors and cinema particularly, because often you find stories will be told that use war, particularly war or poverty or struggle. They'll use that as a background, but they will refuse to confront the cause. I mean, how many war stories do you get that are about war? How many stories have we had about the Second World War? And how many stories have we had that said this is where fascism comes from? The importance of the World War to us, I think to most of us, is what causes fascism. That's the story. Not people shooting each other with heroism or cowardice or the rest of it. It's not the bullets. It's what causes fascism. And you think of the hundreds of stories we've had and the hundreds of films that have exploited war. And I can barely think of one that says that's caused fascism, that's what it was about. Because that's what we need to know. We don't need to know how to fire a pistol and how to fire a rifle or how to fire an automatic machine gun, whatever. We need to know where fascism comes from, because that's at our door now. And that I think, is a lack of morality in filmmaking.
You know, when I was asking the two of you about your future plans earlier in the day, I was kind of refused to be given any details, but let me try it one more time. Do you have at least some, you know, maybe dreams or plans for the future in terms of the mutual collaboration? Because you don't want to throw it away after 12, you know, long features and 2 short movies.
Ken wants to come to the spa here and not talk about stories. Yeah. He wants to sit in a nice fountain there and
I think so.
get his back scrubbed. Yeah. Yeah. We're not here to plan stories. No.
I don't know. Who knows?
But you don't really plan stories, right? It just have to appear, or does it have to just kind of run into you, or what is the? I mean, is maybe the human rights lawyer experience help you in terms of finding the?
I think they just emerge through the mists of a
Right.
lots of conversations and texts and messages.
In between the two of you.
Yes, and
So you see each other a lot.
Yeah, far too much. Yeah, far too much. Yeah.
Do you fight?
No, I think
He's a killer. He master kung fu karate man. Yeah. I would never take him on. No boxing gloves allowed. Yeah.
I did military service.
But so who usually wins? Who usually wins the argument?
No, it's one of great peaceful coexistence. Never an argument. Never. Yeah.
But there must be like different versions of the script, no? There must be sort of.
Well, he's not perfect.
There must be discussions over the dialogues, for example.
No, not really. Well, you throw ideas back and forth, but it's whichever is the stronger ideas wins, which means he wins usually.
Actually, you do raise an important point, really, about collaboration, and we're making jokes about it now. But I mean, what I think is tremendous when you do work with someone who trusts you, and that's mutual.
Right.
You know, and so your loyalty, I mean, we do very different jobs. I mean, I write, Ken directs, but we meet in the middle as filmmakers, and our loyalty is to the story and what we're trying to communicate. And what we try and do is just listen to each other, and if there's a problem, I mean, there's usually some very good reason for it. We try and tease that out and try and be our own toughest critics. You know, and you know, sometimes we feel we make a mistake, and sometimes we feel, well, maybe that works better. So it's a question of, it's not a difficult process, really. It's one of just listening and talking it through. And the great beauty about collaboration is that you're not doing it by yourself. You know, a lot of it is very, very private, and really enjoy that part. I'm sure Ken does too, just imagine how he's going to direct it. But a great deal of it is actually sharing it and thinking aloud. And often what happens is Ken will say something and I'll say something, and that'll lead to something else which we didn't expect, either of us. And so that's the beauty of working together. Yep.
And I think that there's another point about collaboration as well, which is, and I think it's a heresy that's grown up in European film, which is that in order to be a proper filmmaker, you have to be the writer and the director. And I think that's absolutely, I think they're entirely separate talents and separate abilities and separate crafts. And so many times you go to film schools and everyone talks about doing a writing course and writing their own film. And I think that's such a pity because, and Paul's an exception, but other writers I've worked with, and Paul mentioned Jim Allen, who was a great writer, but his sense of structure was very wobbly. But it didn't matter. I mean, like Paul, he could write 2 lines of dialogue and the characters sprang off the page. So working out a structure is you can do that together. That's not the toughest part. But the ability, it's like an artist who can, with a pencil, can make 3 marks on a page and you can see a form. you see a human body, you see a face, you see a character. That's writing talent. And to think that everyone who wants to be a film director can do that, of course, is not true. They can learn the mechanics. They can read the books. Oh, you need this, you need 3 acts, or all that nonsense. But they can't write. I can't write. I mean, I can construct a sentence, but I can't make it live, like his lordship. So I think I think it's such a pity when young filmmakers think they have to write, instead of saying, where can I find a writer? And you can find it everywhere. People are always sending work in, 2 or 3 pages, and there's a smell of truth in it, and a smell of real human experience and comedy and truth. And that's what a film director's got to look out for, not try and laboriously write their own stuff. And I think it's a real heresy in European filmmaking, and it'd be great to hear that there was a different attitude to writing, really.
Thank you very much. There is, I believe, time for a last question because of the suite. So there's a gentleman. So it has to be the question.
Lukáš, yes, I don't know if it will be the question. I have a question on, well, maybe, yes, on your philosophical, ethical, spiritual background, because you got many prizes from ecumenical juries, that's Christian juries, and I read that Paul Laverty was raised as a Catholic, and in one film I heard a phrase, once Catholic, forever Catholic, I will feel guilty all the time. So if you could, and also if you're talking about equality and justice and so on, so those things we hear also often now from Pope Francis. So where are you positioning yourself on those levels, philosophically or more politically, as you wish?
Well, it's usually Catholics in the mold of the Vatican who say once a Catholic, always a Catholic, because it's a way of possessing you, So I don't believe that. But I mean, I grew up in a very, very Catholic background. My mother was from Ireland. My father, he was born of Irish descendants from County Donegal. So the religion was very, very important to them. And I was actually sent to seminary. And in fact, it was remarkable, really, because it was a process of indoctrination. Ended up leaving home at the age of 12, thinking to be a priest, sent to Rome, did a philosophy degree, studied Marxism, taught by Jesuits to undermine Marxism. Very clever, bright people, totally dedicated to their particular truth. And in a strange way, it reminds me of many kind of, it doesn't have to be religion, it could be politics too, where they try to insist there's a black and a white, and there's a right and a wrong, and life is quite simple if you obey the rules. And I met many, many remarkable people there, but I think it's been a great background for a writer, because as a young person, what you want to do is test the gaps, see what's on the other side of the mountain, see what's beyond, talk to people who have come from a different religion and a different background. And I'm sure being locked up for so long gave me absolutely a massive amount of curiosity, which still hasn't left me. So I think all of these experiences mark you, but they don't have to determine who you are. Otherwise, it would be a very boring, dangerous world if you thought that simply by where you were born and who your parents were would dictate how you'd be as a human being. But having said that, I do have great respect for some of what Pope Francis has talked about, especially that recent ecumenical, where he talked about solidarity between human beings now and future generations, and what he's talked about, the environmental crisis. And it's not many popes who have called capitalism the spawn of Satan, which he did, and has criticised what's happening now with Trump and the terrible decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement. So I think all of these big institutions and churches, there are many, many different voices and traditions. There's 1 billion people within the Catholic Church. Some I've met who have been liberation theologians, and other ones who have been absolute right-wing supporters of fascists. So I think we have to sometimes be subtle in how we analyse these grand institutions and how they play out in your own personal life.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for spending the time with us, and enjoy the stay in Karlovy Vary.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.